All right, so we're starting again on a Sunday morning here in Venice, California, March 10th. Uh, Mark and Gabe and Jana are with me. And we're sort of reflecting on the last episode and the last minute episode of the episode in terms of the interaction. And Gabe had said to me clearly during our walk that he felt it sounded like a lot of bickering, which immediately sort of seized my brain up because it doesn't seem like that's what I want to do with people is bicker. And so we're looking at it and also looking at the premise of what we're doing together to try and develop some ideas that can be sound enough to reckon with what we're doing here, which is to really begin to look at the mental obsession as a seeming component of insanity, induced insanity, I would call it. Since if we're choosing the thoughts we're thinking and the ones we think that aren't true, we think are true, that isn't something happening to us, it's something being done by us. And in my brain, I push against that with people because I want it to be obvious that they're fighting and defending something. I want to help them see that the immoral stories, the ones with no principled point, are the only ones they ever defend, because they're the only ones in need of defense, because the root of something that is a lie is all based in defending something that isn't true, claiming it is.
That's it, 100%. And the thing is that I think you are trying to simplify it or to find a loophole to not have that happen. But as a student, rather than the teacher, and having been with you, that's just part of the process, Jack. And, I've had it happen to me. We've all had it happen to us. And this isn't a process that can be simplified. And the beauty of you and how you do it, and I've always said this, is that you bring us back to the principles. You just always do, no matter what. And we're human. We're going to try and give you our story because we want you to share our angst with us. And sometimes, it feels like we get kicked in the teeth a little bit, but it doesn't matter because the end result is that I don't hardly ever defend anything anymore. I really don't. I mean, I would have had co-conspirators all over the island by now. And because you always bring me back to the principles, I've had enormous amounts of growth. And I don't think you can sidestep it or go around it or have it any different than it is, because if someone's just coming in, you're not ready till you're ready. And you have to, there's a lot to unravel to get to the point of living your life with the principles. And I don't know that it's wrong. I know it's not for me, in my opinion and my experience with you. I think what you're doing has to be done. No one else could have pulled off what I couldn't have had the growth I have. I couldn't have the knowledge that I have. I couldn't always go back to the principles if you hadn't have stayed steady. And we're going to fight against you. Of course we are. We have sad stories and we want you to co-conspirator, or everyone that's listening, all our cohorts, to agree with our story. But the principles are the principles no matter what. And you just bring us back to that. It's not personal. It's a principle.
So in that vein, and what we talked about yesterday, and Gabe, please chime in, was being maybe a little more deliberate in our conversation as a small group of participants, because we're obviously speaking to a much broader audience. If we're bringing those principles in and talking about what they are amongst us, rather than butting up against somebody who's attempting to tell us what they're thinking, it may be collectively a little easier to see the simplicity in all this and see the natural nature of it. Like my presumption, and I'm not sure it's a presumption, I believe it's true, is that we know these things. We may not know them in the vocabulary that we develop when we start considering them, because we haven't been thinking of them as something we're doing, but we have an innate knowing nature that, if nature is innate, must be our nature. So that's one of the presumptions here, is that we're seemingly coming from the thing we often claim to want to get to, in the mistaken idea that because our thinking is conflicted, who we are is conflicted, rather than see that the conflicts in our thoughts are actually evidence that we know better. And that is an awareness of our experience sharing with us, giving us perspective to actually see through understanding what we're doing interior to what we can see. The visible seeing is something we do with our eyes. The substantive seeing, the seeing what we're doing in this analytical process and the choices we're making, is coming through understanding that our body's actually telling us through the anxiety, the defensiveness, the reactiveness, that we're trying to defend something or trying to make something right that we know isn't right. And to come to that point is to really pop a bubble in terms of this process and say, oh, whenever that's happening, I know I'm up to something, which is the words I use. Nothing we can talk about here need be followed in the words we use, because everyone is free to think what they do, reminding everyone that the freedom to actually translate this into a workable product in your own experience is always going to be your right. It doesn't make that right if what you're doing with it is wrong and creating more conflict and more fight and all those things. You're welcome to do that. You're free to do that. We're all free to do that. So I mention that because I am not trying to pose this in a way. I don't think I am, and there may be a part of me doing this, and I'm not quite aware of it yet. So I'll mention it as we go. I'm not doing what I can to say my words are absolutely correct. I'm simply referencing through words, like words are. They're references to things, definitions of things. But those things that we're defining, that essence we're defining, may be indefinable within words. It doesn't mean we don't know it because we can't define it or because we keep arguing and struggling over the words about it. It means that we may well know it and keep relying on thinking and thinking and thinking and trying to get it right in the words, rather than begin to simply concede that if nature is natural, that must be our nature. If nature is able to have the entire universe functioning as it's functioning right now to allow us to both be here, witness what's happening, and actually participate in it, it may be worth mentioning that that's a baseline for our existence. It isn't something that we have to think about any more than we think about all the trillions of functions going on in our body at any given moment. We really tend to only pay attention to those trillions of functions when we hurt, when something painful happens. Emotional stress is a very easy thing to identify, and it's telling us something's wrong. So thinking in principled terms is starting to define the principles, I would say. And one thing about principles that is fairly obvious is that they don't change. They're just laws of nature, laws of the order of nature, and probably the terms of life. Meaning, if we align with them, we're very productive, very efficient, very effective in being beneficial to others, with others. So, thoughts.
Well, I think the freedom that's given by, I don't even know how to line it up, but I know that there's a huge freedom when my automatic go-to is if I'm starting to defend, and it's not with malice, it's not like I'm gritting my teeth and saying, I can't defend this. Somehow it just melts away and I'm okay with it. And that's like my life goal, to not, it gives way to, me and the only thing that's real is love thing. And it gives way to that without resentment. And I had, we can all give examples and be co-conspirators, but I had an experience recently that could have gone completely sideways. And I started thinking, of course, all kinds of things to retort. And I said, well, okay, we'll have to pick this up later. I'll talk to you soon. And then the next time when we physically got together, it was a worker. You could tell there was some defense there, but because I had had time to unwind it or unravel it and let go of any kind of defense, everything went smooth. And it was it was like a miracle. It's like life is like an absolute miracle when you give up defense. And it's not a sacrifice. It's how life should flow.
So, in the word you used, dissolve, you said it, dissipated or
Yeah,
something,
yeah, it
is
dissolves.
it's kind of like a foggy notion we talked about this yesterday. The idea that it's real gives it, in our mental story and narrative, a sense of substance and solidity that we can't see through. And yet, if you stare at those thoughts, you'll notice you see right through them, because as you face what you're actually looking at, it's an illusion being thought of as reality. It seems to be intractable and unsolvable because it seems as though it's something happening to us rather than something being created by us. It's just a manifestation of our thinking.
Yeah,
So
and I
that
think,
dissolution is different than a resolution, which is a repeated attempt to fix something that feels better, rather than start to actually see that it will dissolve when you have it. Notice it for what it is. If you just notice it and say, wow, this is a defense, I must be defending something, I don't even have to know what that something is to know that I'm doing that.
right, the physicality of it, and also it's almost like having you and the principles, not you specifically as Jack, but it is true.
Yes.
You're the one that helped me, but the it's what you do in the meetings when you bring people back, except that it's more visceral because there's other people listening and you're the one that's bringing them back. But it's just like working out. It's an exercise now. That's what my brain does. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what my neurons do. They go to that. But that took you many times correcting me or helping me to get back to off of my rant about whatever it was that happened to me and trying to make everyone co-conspirators with me in my sad story, that I wanted them to help me defend against whatever. And now I don't know how it happened. It's an amazing gift and I'm more than grateful, I'll tell you that. But nothing's easy, really, and you can't just walk in the door and expect things to start being perfect, like happened to Gabe when he came in. No, I'm kidding. But
Well,
Gabe's
it kind
my
of did.
I know, he's my shining star. He made me always want to even come back more and more and more, because if he could feel so much better so fast, then I could the sky was the limit. But I don't know, it's an amazing gift, and I just think the process has to be you're just never ready till you're ready, and we need
So,
you to keep us straight.
well, part of our conversation, and my sense is we already know what's straight or we wouldn't struggle. And it's beginning to identify that those struggles are actually our knowingness, the anxiety, the stress, the depression, the conflicts, the defensiveness. That's all us knowing. That's all a language being spoken by our body saying, this is wrong. And what's wrong is basically what doesn't work. It's not effective. It's an action, but it's not a productive, principled action, because there's no real benefit to anyone else other than creating more reactivity in everyone else. And if the nature of my reactivity is creating more reactivity, then I feel all of a sudden like I'm in a world of reactivity, and that's how the world is, when in fact it's all just generated out of my own ideas about that. But in the simplicity part, it's always simple, which is what gives us the clarity to see those variations. And to think that those variations are my reality is to think I'm in those variations, and I lose all perspective and all chance to even imagine there's a solution, because I don't feel there's anything other than me being stuck in those things, and those things being something I can be stuck in, rather than say that's just the illusion of making believe it's true, and starting to say, oh, that's the premise of the whole thing, is thinking that thoughts are reality rather than simply imagined. We take this creative capacity we have, and in the big book, it talks about there's great use for constructive imagination. He points that out in the big book. Constructive imagination is very different than we're destructive in our imagination by making believe we're the creators of reality, and as a result, there is no other reality. And the tension and the stress and the trauma that's created for us gives us a very strong sense of being alone and being apart from and being less than and having low self-esteem and low self-worth. And all of those are accurate assessments of what we're doing in thinking, not who we are in our essence. Our essence doesn't change if there is an essence that's absolute.
It's incorruptible essence.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the thinking though. When we say we don't know, we're really saying we don't think we know because the thinking we're doing is thinking it knows something else that's true that isn't true. It's that conflict of thinking that way. So, Gabe, you made some very good points yesterday about approaching this. And one of the things that came out of that was saying, what are really the fundamentals of this conversation? Because they each lead in and around each other immediately, because anything absolute in any regard is really tapping everything simultaneously, which is what intuition is.
Right. I guess I would say that the Santiago thing, I had a glimpse of him trying to say the same thing
Yes.
that you were trying to say.
Yes.
You wouldn't let his logic continue for a sentence. So I wanted to just say that and just sort of say that I wanted to let people, I don't know, and maybe I'm wrong. I could be completely wrong, but give them a sense like we did with our female friend yesterday. Is she came to her known realization at that, 3/4 through that walk after all of our discussions that the same thing that she was talking about is what Santiago was talking about, is what you talk about. And
Right.
so there is an absoluteness, a nothingness and everythingness that we will get to. But I think I don't know, do some people need to go through their own logic and experience to do that? I don't know.
Well, let's say we all do. And that's what, the freedom we have really does give us that right to process in any way we choose. And to begin to notice that is to begin to be response able to the choosing we're doing rather than reactive thinking we aren't. Really, that's really the premise right there. If we're free to do this, then we are free to condemn ourselves too. And the fact that we don't want to admit we have anything to do with it is the shame and guilt for doing something so abysmal with something so freeing. We've taken freedom and turned it into a liability rather than an asset. So one of the points we talked about too yesterday, Gabe, and I think one of the essential issues of addiction is enabling. And looking for the
I see where this is going to go. Sorry.
looking for the line in my thinking, I cannot seem to find. As much as I look, I don't seem to know where it is to be able to start in a way that I'm actually helping without starting in any way and starting to adjust according to the experience I'm having with the individual I'm having that experience with, or the individuals. If you follow me?
Mm-hmm.
Since we're all free, it doesn't mean I have any idea what you're thinking and how you're thinking. The one idea that I have is that if we're all built on the same platform, we're probably doing the same fundamental thing, but we're doing it in ways with different faces and places and times associated to it, as though our circumstances define a distinction between us, while in fact we're all using the same circumstances to justify that distinction and not notice that that's actually a shared, indivisible function that we're all doing together, that humans are doing. It's just the thing we do.
Right.
So
yeah, you were saying about separating us from the animals is think about our own existence, think about our future and past.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, then that really comes down to thinking about thinking. And somebody sent me, maybe you sent it to me last week, Socrates or Aristotle, who said the
Yeah.
only thing we worry about is thinking about thinking. That thinking about thinking causes worry. Now, I would say throughout human history, this has been a conflict that has been going on and undiagnosed, honestly. And it's the same with alcohol. It wasn't until the mid 30s that there was a culmination of organizations and people who had been giving thought to it that the breakthrough of the 12 steps was created. They did not come out of nowhere. They came out of a succession of understanding and seeing that led to the culmination of Bill Wilson realizing in a hospital bed that One alcoholic could carry a message to another alcoholic around the world that it was no different. There was no discrimination in it at all. It was an equitable disease, meaning anybody could get it and have it. And it was also an equitable solution, meaning everyone can partake in it. And it happens one person to another, not some global effort that needs to be organized in a fight against something, but literally just one person to the next person, which is really how we're already interacting right now. We don't have to think we are to be doing what we're doing in relation to everyone else's doings, and to notice that we're all doing that same thing. And that I would say is a fundamental bit of understanding that helps to kind of consolidate this idea that we're different, we're separate, and we're alone. Because even in those assessments of feeling less than and feeling low self-esteem and all that, we're actually feeling the thought we're having. We're not feeling the essence of our existence. So to think those thoughts are true and real is to think that that's the essence of who we are, and now I become wrong, and I become dysfunctional, and I have no esteem, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, rather than saying that's a misplacement on me as a being, on my essence. And collectively, I would say we've been doing this a long time, versus seeing that that's actually an accurate reflection. All that terminology is accurately reflecting the thinking we're doing that has no substance. So there is no esteem in it. They say it's even low esteem would be to give it some esteem, and there's no esteem in it at all. There's no power in it at all. Like a lie, there is absolutely no power in a lie. That's the whole problem with a lie. It takes constant attention to continue to maintain the defense, to make believe that it's true. It doesn't just exist that way, because reality and truth already exist that way permanently. Absolutely. In the simplest way, to your point earlier, Jan, the simple aspect of this is start to see that everything's based on absolute simplicity because it doesn't change. And our thinking about it in changing ways doesn't change reality and truth. It changes our opinions and et cetera, which is how we're designed to function within this relative experience of relationships. But if I think my thinking shouldn't change, I'm now attempting to be that thing I already am. And all I do is use excuses to justify why my thinking's failing, when in fact my thinking was never designed to be who I am, but express the essence of that loving nature that we all share. Whatever that infinite source is that gives and gives, it doesn't, I wouldn't even say it gives. I would say just is. And it's like light speed. Light speed's absolute. It's always doing full speed. It doesn't start and build up speed. It doesn't go through that. It just does what it does. That's the sort of, here's evidence in the universe speaking to this absolute aspect of our existence. And light has always been a form of enlightenment and brilliance and radiance and all those words that are attached to it. People are lit up. It's always spoken to this essence being expressed. So if historically we've been seeing this as far back as Aristotle and Socrates and different people thousands of years ago who started to identify this worry, like Buddha identified it as attachment. And from my understanding, he didn't say life is suffering. He said when we're attaching to desire, we start to suffer in life. That's the component. My thinking is that he was talking about addiction, but it had been undiagnosed as an addiction, just like alcoholism had been undiagnosed as an addiction that was a combination of a physical allergy in a body, which is an abnormal reaction to something, and a mental obsession in the mind. We can recover from a symptom, but the obsession will attach to anything, anywhere, at any time that we're entertaining ideas that we make believe are true that are not true. Because the root cause of addiction is thinking you can control something you have absolutely no control over once you ingest it. And most of those things, not ironically, have us feel better, whereas most actual allergies do not have us feel better because they're alert systems in our body to stop us from doing it again. If we have a peanut allergy, throats choke up and people get very, very stressed, and they do not go near peanuts. Don't want to, even now you've got labels that say this product was produced in a factory that also uses peanuts. People don't want to get near that if they got a peanut allergy. They know better. The problem with alcohol and drugs and all the compulsions we use is that, first of all, they're never good for us. And secondly, they give us an immediate sense of satisfaction and gratification that seems to be overcoming the dismal nature of the thinking we're doing. Seems to offset the thinking, but what it really does is further entrench our commitment to that thinking so that we continue to do the thing to prove we can, when in fact all the proof is evidence that we cannot continue at all. Healthy, anyhow, in any kind of healthy way. So if this has been undiagnosed, then talking about it is like a new language. And there's a lot of things that I learned to do to feel better in my life that I realized by doing those things. And this was the point I was hinging on with Santiago. I was so committed to doing those things to feel better until one day I thought, what is it that has me feeling bad so often? What am I doing? Not what's happening to me, why the circumstances keep looking. What am I doing? Because I realized if I'm at the center of the problem with respect to my alcoholism and my drug addiction, who else but my own choices, this free choice that I'm able to make, the freedom that I have to think anything I want, and then also want whatever I get. That freedom seems violated when what I get is something I think I don't want. That's how this discussion began, because it started to occur to me that's the mental obsession. That's the primary addiction, because the disease apparently centers in the mind. And what's ironic about that is self-centeredness is considered the one thing we need to crush at depth and eliminate completely, let go absolutely, et cetera, et cetera. So wouldn't that suggest this self-centered in the mind is the disease? And the idea that my thinking about thinking, just as Aristotle or whoever said that's the source of worry, my thinking about thinking itself, I've turned into myself and think that who I am is centered in thought, rather than I have more and more thoughts centered in thought and start to see that it's just something I'm doing. When I see it as me, I feel like it's everything because I'm in it. When I see it as something I'm doing, I look at it as something happening that I'm choosing. I see it freely because I'm observing it, and I've always observed it. I've just created an impression, an insane impression, that I'm in it. I have no perspective once I'm in it. My back is up against the wall of that bubble, defending it, thinking the limits expose me to risk, rather than seeing accurately that the limits actually define everything else that exists. There's no risk in everything that exists. There's no risk in a principle. There's no risk in something that's absolute, because it's not at risk and can't be lost. It can't be found. It's just as it is now, always. So what would, Mark had his own experience. Gabe, you had an experience, your experience, if I remember, Gabe. Why don't you share what that was initially?
It was, I suffered from crippling panic attacks and fear, from really just my head, my thoughts, and being introduced to you just one sentence. Consider that your thoughts might not be true, that your thoughts may be a lie. And I consider myself a intelligent individual, logical, and I had never ever thought that my thoughts weren't true, were false. I never ever had that consideration. So by taking a step back and just considering the next panic attack coming on, just considering this may not be true what you're thinking. Even that consideration, the may not. It could be true.
Maybe, right.
Maybe.
That was the point I was going to make. So maybe the softening of this, like Bill says so much in the book, you may encounter, you may see, while he also says absolute statements, like for us to drink is to die, that sort of thing. So the consideration and the maybe, the might not be true, may be elements in a presentation to somebody that gives them a chance to consider it, rather than be told, feel like they're being told that thing.
Yeah, just consider. I think it would be wise to repeat that throughout our continuing conversations, is to just consider these ideas.
Yeah. And I think the other aspect of that is maybe and might.
Yeah.
Maybe this could be true. Now, interestingly, if we all have the freedom to think what we want, and I'm telling somebody what to think, I'm asking them to think the way I'm thinking rather than the way they're thinking, that would typically create a reaction because the freedom they have is to think whatever they want. Who am I to tell them what to think?
Right.
And I mean, I remember this in kindergarten. You can't tell me what to say. You can't tell me what to do. Who do you think you are? That sort of thing.
Right.
So at the same time we're doing this, we're also admitting, I would say, or conceding that the person we're talking to may know more than they're thinking. We're actually giving them credit by saying, I don't have to tell you the words I use, the ones you use. I'm going to tell you, use any words you want. You know why? Because you're free to think whatever you want. You have the absolute right to do it. It doesn't make what you think right. It also doesn't make it wrong. It just makes what you think.
That's the rub.
Yeah.
That's something that's hard.
Well, I think the hardness becomes when you think it's the only thing that as soon as I think something's right and real and true, I think it's the only thing I can think.
Right. Yeah.
Interesting. So where's the freedom in that? Freedom, choice, and responsibility, in my experience, are basically the pyramid of mental health. Because if we're free to think what we want, we're also free to notice that we want what we get. However it is, we actually want it. Now, we may say, well, I didn't intend for that, but I think it's a misuse of intention. If who I am and how I am is the totality of all of the things I'm doing, and my thinking is faltering, wouldn't I want evidence of that faltering before I continue to falter so long that I destroy everything? Wouldn't that be a good sign to actually notice that that faltering is actually telling me I'm off course? I'm not aligning with life's terms. I'm maligned with life's terms. You follow?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's good information all of a sudden. So to see that I'm watching my thinking and observing my thinking, the thinking gets very small as something I'm doing rather than this idea that it's true and real and becomes all encompassing and completely blinding to anything else, because now I've taken on the role of being reality and being truth. And now anyone who thinks different than I do is threatening my life, because that's who I am. Not true. Simply not true. That's ego manifestation of making believe that who we are is what we think, rather than who we are is as we are. We're always as we are, and we think. Secondarily, thinking is something we do, just like waving my hand, or any choice I make in thinking will precede a voluntary action, every one of them. So every drink was preceded by a thought that I could do it, but the sick thinking tells me I can do it without the consequence of what the consequence always was, which is that I overdid it and I did too much at the wrong time with the wrong people, the whole thing. But my sense is that's a key element, is just talking about the fact that we're free to think what we want. It does not mean that what we think is right. We have the right to think what we want, but it does not make it right. And then also talk about just, it seems to me that consideration has been sort of a mainstay of this conversation. But if anyone, in my experience, is reactive, if they're prone to being reactive, and my experience is that as people start looking at what they're doing, they start noticing the reactivity and actually start playing it out, because the reactivity has been based on actions that are defending it so long, it seems to be the only thing to do. So they're really beginning to dissolve the addiction to the idea that doing more and more and more of the same is going to get some different result, and starting to actually dissolve it in a way. If you follow me.
Well, either that's the addiction or that's the problem, I guess.
Yeah, well, that would be the same thing. So the sanity in living is beginning to have, and notice we have, everything is in perfect order, because one thing we can always say about the moment is that everything that's happening is happening. So if I begin to realize that everything happening is happening in the moment, I begin to also acknowledge that what I'm thinking about those things is also happening, because I'm choosing those thoughts. And I may not think I'm choosing those thoughts, and I don't need to apparently think I'm choosing those thoughts to be choosing those thoughts any more than I need to think I know to know. Starts to kind of unveil some of the trickery and the tomfoolery and the deceptiveness of this whole idea that we can hide what we're doing and it has no impact on us, when the impact is clear, and the impact on everyone else has been clear through human history, the violence and the sort of degrading conditions that we've allowed humans to suffer under, with thinking there's nothing we can do about it. And that's just human nature. That's just another lie about nature.
Careful, Jack. You're treading on dangerous ground.
Exactly. Now, isn't it funny that actually talking about something accurately would be dangerous, because through history, people who had, I always think about this in relation to the humans who stood on Earth and looked at the skies and presumed, based on where they stood, that what they saw put them at the center of the universe, which would mean nobody else was at the center of the universe. Stephen Hawking came along and said, well, if the universe is infinite, everybody's at the center. So you can see one of those ideas is divisive, separating us from everything else in the universe, thinking that we're like the chosen species in the midst of a universe that we're actually relying on. While we think we're far from everything, everything is interconnected, so it's present with us here now, compared to seeing that if everybody's at the center of anything infinite, we're all there. Everybody's there simultaneously, exactly in the way that we have the freedom to think. We start looking at that freedom and begin to recognize it, and then begin to see how quick we are to say, I didn't want this, I didn't expect this. When I think my thoughts are right, I think the only thing that will happen is what I want when I had that thought. So a week or two later, when I don't get it, I'm feeling depressed over the idea that my expectation is dashed, when in fact the real expectation was that the thought I had was real, rather than I had a thought. And as that thought was expressed, I had evidence that I completely overlooked, because I was waiting to get what I thought I wanted rather than see what was actually happening. So I become numb, I become blind, seemingly, because I don't want to see those things. So within the thinking we're free to do, we are free to think what we want about what's happening, and we are free to think what we want about what we hear and see. But it doesn't mean what we're hearing is what is said, and it doesn't mean what we see is what is there. We have the right to think freely, doesn't make our thinking right. And beginning to just contemplate this, consider it might be true, maybe, is to concede that if we have a knowing sense and begin to consider things accurately, we will know where they fit and how they fit, because we won't think about them anymore, but start operating on a basis that's transformed significantly from the one we thought we had to manage constantly in the defenses that we were performing all the time. So what is that? A relief of stress, a relief of anxiety, a relief of this constricted experience of being choked and suffocating. And what happens? Body relaxes, we breathe better, the vascular structure opens up, starts to allow us to breathe better. It actually starts to welcome the deeper breath, because it isn't constricted. Our bowel movements work better. There's less issues in our intestines and rectum and all those things that tend to get screwed up by hanging on to shit, literally. So health changes, just as health changes when we add stress to it. There is no disease I know of that doesn't assign anxiety and stress as a precursor and or a factor in that disease getting worse or being even caused. And I would say the stress is the disease, and the mental state is in fact the disease that eventually occurs in the body, because of the stress we put the body under. It starts to malfunction. and dysfunction. Our actions become dysfunctional because we're malfunctioning at the primary essence of our thinking about reality by making believe it's our reality, my truth, rather than our truth and our reality, and talk about it that way. So that is a very good basic point. Consider, maybe, might.
Yeah, it's a good starting point.
Possibly another part of that. Just possibly, I'll pose another one. Maybe one of the thoughts that occurred to me years back was maybe I have something to do with this. Maybe what I'm doing is involved in this. And in my short story, what happened was I began seeing that things kept repeating themselves at different times in different places with different faces, but they always felt like the same thing to me. Life keeps happening this way. Why does this keep happening? And it just began to occur to me, if I exist, I am responsible for what's happening. And if I did not exist, I would certainly not be responsible. So to claim I'm irresponsible while I exist would be a major violation to the absolute nature of existence in my thinking, not in reality, because reality isn't affected. Truth and reality and what's absolute is not affected by my dysfunctional or insane thinking, because within the context of reality, it doesn't even exist. My experience is suffering because my experience is the consequence of what I'm thinking about what is happening. And if I was simply witnessing what is happening, my experience, like in a state of meditation, when I'm deliberately looking for that peace, my experience would be peaceful. It would be relaxed. And I would suggest that's their absolute state of being all the time. In our essence. Doesn't mean we're thinking that. It doesn't mean we're doing that. It doesn't mean we're talking about that. Those are all consequences of thinking. How I talk, what I say, how I act, what I do are all consequences of thinking, but thinking is the primary action in human experience. If I'm not thinking, if I'm in a coma, I do not have an experience to go with that. And there's plenty of evidence of people who've been in comas for 20 years that wake up and say, what day is it? What time is it? We talked about this yesterday. It's typically what time is it? What day is it? They're thinking from the last moment they remember because the rest of it was gone. They didn't have any experience because they weren't conscientious or conscious of that experience. They weren't interacting because they weren't thinking. They were in a coma. There may have been some knowing awareness that they knew, but it wasn't based in the human thinking awareness of thought. So the question is, what day is it? What year is it? What month is it? What year is it? Before they realize, what? 2024? And I went into a coma in 2003? And this has happened. There's evidence of this. So if we don't exist, obviously we have no responsibility. But it wouldn't even be a question because there would be no thinking to question things. Knowing doesn't think because knowing doesn't question because it knows. It doesn't have any question. It doesn't struggle in that. That's intuition. Intuition is essentially what thinking is for us when we're using it properly because it's wisdom. It's the insight of knowledge, the life, the actual terms of life that we're expressing, not coming to a conclusion of because we're thinking about it all the time, but simply expressing naturally without having to think in that way. So our thinking can be employed in actually realizing the imaginative ideas we're capable of creating out of existing reality, which is transformation. It isn't creating reality. It's taking existing reality and turning it into something that didn't exist before it was turned into that thing. And yet all the things that that new thing is made of absolutely existed throughout the entire time the atoms, the molecule, all the substructure, subatomic level substructure has been in existence as long as it's existed, which is billions of years. Certainly not something I made up because I thought of it. So thoughts might not be true. So that's consideration, maybe, might, and possible. Great words to consider rather than must be, should be, can't be otherwise, has to be, all that kind of stuff. All those things tend to encourage reactivity because they're not true. Because nothing has to be if everything already is. It doesn't have to be that way, it just is that way. Not because somebody judged it to be that way, it's just the basis of existence. So, Mark, are you with us yet?
I've been listening. Yeah, I'm here. I'm listening. I am still in the car with people.
And you're dropping people off.
Correct.
Okay.
So watch what we say.
What's that?
So watch what we say.
No, I've got headset in.
Oh, okay.
So if I remember right, I'll speak for you while you're with them. So you're not speaking into midair and they're wondering what the hell you're talking about. It seemed to me the thing that struck you primarily was the concept of absolute being absolute.
Correct. And independent from, especially independent from my thoughts.
Well, I would suggest it's not independent from your thoughts if it's absolute, but your thoughts can think they're independent from it, and there's the source of the problem.
Right. Well, independent and absolute from my reality or our reality. It's not just my reality.
Yeah. Well, I would again reverse it and say your ideas of reality seem independent of reality, which would be that's where the induced insanity occurs, which gives credence to the idea that we really think our thoughts are reality, to think that we can displace or impact reality in the absolute term. So I'm just turning it around a little bit, but nevertheless, considering that sort of shifted some thought. You looked that word up too, if I remember.
Absolutely.
So I can be pretty sure that you did. I don't have to worry about that.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
and I do want to say how this conversation and today's podcast started, with what you were saying, and then what Jana was saying, was some of the most beautiful things that I've heard in a long time, especially so accurate for me, and really beneficial in breaking that obsessiveness, that obsessive
chatter.
Yes, thank you.
She was lending you some of hers for that.
Yeah.
And again, I've taken that, and I've taken that co-conspiracy. I mean, that was huge for me and helping me understand what I was why I was so obsessed, was that I was I wanted a co-conspirator.
Of course.
And again, it was, and I'm sort of feel like I'm a little half in and half out of two things. I'm like trying to do too many things at once between my morning meeting and this meeting. But it just really helped break that cycle. I think also about when to sort of, we were talking about with like letting people tell the story or not tell the story, and when to sort of cut it off and when not to cut it off. If you had just continued to let me go all the time, it would have been, I wouldn't have broken that cycle. So that's why, what Jana was saying was just so beautiful and well put this morning.
To that point, Mark, while we're on it,
I'm
going to jump in and interrupt, which I'm very good at. I've actually developed that skill better than most others. One of the points that you made was that when I did that with you, what I just did, interrupted you, you felt sort of attacked, maybe afraid or violated a little bit.
Resentful.
Is that right, Mark? What were your words?
When yesterday or when?
I think you said it yesterday early in the morning when we were still in the house having coffee.
No, I had heard you say that you were looking for the rub, not necessarily to me, but in our discussions of what's going on. And I was able to hold on to that and recognize that you were coming from a place of love. And even just like when you just interrupted me right now, like for me not to get defensive about that is huge growth. And
see, right.
And
well, you're going to have plenty of opportunity to get used to that.
Well, I have. And even right now, like I was like, okay, like I was able to calmly sit in my skin and let you do that and not get defensive and not need to. And so that's been beneficial for me and something that, that I've been able to carry with me to let me be much more comfortable in my own skin. And I just, whatever, it's been growth. But I think also back to what I was going to finish that thought was letting people at least get a little bit of the story, like a sentence, like as Gabe was saying, a full sentence of it out so they can hear their own sickness.
Yeah.
Beneficial.
Yeah.
Well, keep in mind though, if what I learned, I got stabbed by a guy.
Yeah.
Right. I thought I was helping him. It's a big lesson in help. I had to get stabbed 4 times, 9-inch knife in my back, had my throat slit, my arm cut to the bone. JP, who's here now, he was getting off a plane in Los Angeles. I don't know, how long was it that we had talked?
It was a long time. It was at least 9 months, but I was getting off a plane.
Yes, you were coming off a plane in Los Angeles. He sensed something was wrong. This was within the same 30 minutes that I got stabbed. Sensed something was wrong. Tried to get me, and then called my girlfriend at the time. And he ended up at the hospital within minutes of my arrival in an ambulance at UCLA. But the point is, not to glorify that whole thing. The point is that I had helped this guy thinking I was helping him, and what I realized is that I was helping him to the idea that I was a big help. I was helping myself to the idea that I was being a really big help, because this guy was clearly mentally ill. He had serious issues, and I had made friends with him in the sense that I had catered to him and gave him things that he liked. So he thought he liked me until he tried to blow up the neighbor's car because the guy asked him not to use their laundry facilities. And I said to him, I am not supporting you in the way that I do because I want you to do, because I'm hoping that you blow the neighborhood up. And I said, I can't support you if that's how you're going to behave. I can't do that. I will disconnect from that. So I had some awareness that there was a potential I might be doing the wrong thing. And he said, well, I know how to take care of guys like you. And I said, you may, but I'm not changing my mind. If that's your path, I'm not going to be on it with you. But the point I'm making is that enabling is at the core of the mental disease, because when I think I'm helping somebody by listening more and more and more to that immoral story that's basically an excuse for why they wouldn't be where they are with what they have right now, which is effectively all storytelling that isn't moral. It's all an excuse to use to help create the conspiracy of dunces, the confederacy of dunces, according to the book, of people who end up in this sort of conspiracy of thinking, yeah, I know what you mean. Life's hard, life's difficult, life's this, life's that. I understand. And to continue to do that at any level Now, it took me getting stabbed to notice that I was doing something wrong. That's a pretty good amount of willingness to deny what I was doing while I was doing it, make believe that somehow the belief was going to win out. When in fact, what won out was exactly what was there the whole time that I was ignoring, not paying attention to. So in that procession of listening, when I hear those, I know the stories when I hear them because they're always built on the basis of I don't have anything to do with this. I'm a victim. It's them, then, or they. It's always something else, somewhere else, doing something to them that's still lingering. That is not a principled moral story. Interesting thing about moral stories is they have principled points. And the beauty of that is you don't need to tell the story to make the point. And that's what this discussion was ultimately designed to do, and has taken some time to create a level of participation with people that have been active enough and engaged enough to have the conversation and actually start to share those, like your point, Mark, when you said what you said about me rubbing, when you heard me say it to somebody else, but it made the point for you that I'm intending to do that. I want to rub, I want to push, I want to get in the middle of it. I want to be the bad guy. I want to be the asshole. I want to be the one causing it in someone else's mind. I'm okay with that because I want to participate with them in the experience of beginning to realize that I'm not there to hate them. I'm there to do something that might actually help them if they're willing. I can't do it for them. I can't decide for them when that willingness begins or how it begins or what they think, but I can certainly be a participant in their experience, as we all are, and as you have all been for me in this process. That's productive and principled and has a basis in reality, while it still may be skewed in some way with thoughts I have that aren't quite right yet. But I get better at starting to notice what they are, and I notice them, and I don't have to figure them out, not ask why and all that. I simply state that it's happening is assured. Why it's happening always just leads to more doubt and insecurity and uncertainty.
So I think we're sort of started this with, listen, I'm not perfect at this and I do it incorrectly sometimes, but we're all very appreciative of the way that you do it. And I definitely can only speak for myself. I mean, it definitely helped me. But getting back to the point of letting somebody hear a little bit of their sickness. Again, we all have our traumas, and obviously what you went through was very traumatic. And maybe if we're trying to find some middle grounds a little bit of a better or more effective way to communicate with people and get this across to people, to identify that some of the way that you're doing it is in it from your trauma.
I don't think that experience was as traumatic as what I do right now about something that isn't happening that I think is happening. I don't really see it that way. That thing is over. It was over 18. How long ago was that, JP? Like 2005 or something?
But it's something that you carry with you still today.
Well, there is a little bit of physicality that goes on when there's, I live in a neighborhood, as you know, in Venice. There's a lot of people who aren't well on our streets, and I never know what to expect of them. I am keenly aware now of the potential they have in a much different way than I was when I thought it will never happen to me because it had never happened, right? So I'm aware of that. But the process for me was very life confirming. It wasn't something about, I know that people do things wrong. I had just been denying that it could happen to me. I was just living in a bubble, that same kind of thinking. Because it hadn't happened, I thought, oh, it would never happen. And then it happened, and I realized, you know what? Everything that's possible is always possible. That's another one of the principles I live by. Everything that is possible is always possible. Why? Because everything happening right now is happening. And if freedom is the nature of my thinking, then freedom is the nature of my existence. And that means that I am able to do anything I can do right now. What does that mean? That to think the only thing I can do is one thing isn't true. That's the addiction. The lie of addiction is I can't do anything else. There is nothing else to do. And then I feel that there's no solution, because obviously if the only thing I can do is the wrong thing to constantly redo it and redo it and redo it, I don't imagine there's any solution, because there's nothing else I can do. And I have nothing to do with it. It's happening to me. All of that stuff evolves out of that thinking. So my trauma, I don't suspect, came from that, because it was a pretty elevated experience and I walked away from it. At the other end, I came back to the place I was stabbed to walk home that day to complete that cycle I started, just to be responsible for the point that I started and stopped. I wanted to make that circle. And I was obviously damaged. I mean, the damage of the surgery was greater than the actual damage that the guy caused, because they had to look for intestines and other things that were split and separated and could have caused septic shock and all that. But it was a windfall of insight. And I can talk about that another time. I don't want to go a lot further in the direction, but it led to where I am today with what I have and what we're doing. It was the beginning of seeing things so much clearer. And I expect these extreme things we think should never happen are actually that sort of clarity. We think they shouldn't happen, just as Gabe said, this is a very dangerous topic to bring up. Why? Because it begins to disrupt the presumption that all that should be happening is what people think should be happening. And most of those people that think that should be happening are using their influence to demand of others to do things those others would never do if it weren't for the fear and the threat that thinking creates, and the potential consequences that creates. And I talked about that, the idea that people standing on the planet looked out into space and thought they were at the center of the universe. That is a metaphor for this idea that simply because I can think something is true, that it means that thing is true. The exact same thing. That self-centered idea is that everything I think, because I conclude it's right, must be right. That's a pretty big leap. While the witness of what we've been doing as a species shows that we've been capable of doing great harm and great wrong, and we're still debating whether we had anything to do with it. I don't even have to claim we had everything to do with it to suggest we might have possibly had, let's use our new words, considered that it might be, possibly we had something to do with it. Possibly. It's laughable not to consider that. In my sense, what came out of yesterday's talk too, I think I sent that text, I forget. Let me pick that up, because it really occurred to me, given how serious that some of these conversations have got in those bickering bouts, if they're bickering, I hate the term, but it must mean I am engaging in it to be able to be so sensitive to it. But let me see where that was. I think what I was saying or thinking was that the real goal of this conversation is to begin to laugh at what we take so seriously, because we realize that it's actually been a joke that we were taking personally because we thought our life depended on those thoughts. We thought we had a person to take that seriously. So it's not very funny when a joke's on you. And my sense is humans have been fighting because they don't want to laugh at how ridiculous this whole silly imposition is on our experience, that we make believe what we think is true, when that's really what kids do in their fantasy and what fairy tales were all written about. Someday it's going to come true in a fantasy fairy tale. When adults are thinking fantasy is reality, that is a major problem. Yet, I'm not suggesting it shouldn't be happening. I'm suggesting if it's happening, not even suggesting that it's happening. But again, back to our words. If it's happening, if would be another word in that list. If it's happening, maybe it isn't the best we can do. Maybe there's something wrong with what's happening in that regard. Maybe to think it's right, I mean, imagine thinking that what is wrong is right is really something that only exists in a thought. It doesn't exist in the world. Lies don't exist in the world and the universe. They exist in the thoughts of humans. Because we're capable of thinking about our thinking, we're capable of thinking our thinking is right when it's wrong. We're we're capable of thinking when we feel condemned, it's because of everyone and everything else, including life. Life is hard, life condemns, life is a struggle, when in fact we're simply struggling with the thought, and the lens we're looking through with that thought sees life as culpable for it because we can't stand the idea of actually noticing. If we noticed that we were responsible for it, the whole thing would vanish. Because the question would be, why would I continue to do this to cause this feeling? That would be crazy. Bingo. Yes. So the goal here is to start looking at things as silly impositions rather than taking them so seriously as to think that they're these intractable things that we really have to wade through and work through, and to see this at its essence is what healing is and what forgiveness is and what all of the virtue is in terms of our morality and the comprehensible capacity we have to witness morality rather than the incomprehensible immorality that's impossible to comprehend. Just starts to make sense of sense rather than wonder why we use common sense as a term and know very clearly there's very little common sense in most of what seems to be happening. Anthony, welcome.
Thank you.
So a couple of things we've come to today is starting to see that two things. To Gabe's point, the thing that impacted him initially was thoughts might not be true. Just the consideration of that sort of snapped him out of that bubble. And I remember him having a profound experience with it. Now, another thing worth noting is that to start seeing these things accurately in the immediate sense is to start also beginning to grow and allow that awareness to see how many things we've been harboring, how many thoughts seem to be deep and invisible because we've dealt with them so long, we've taken for granted they're real. We forgot. We seem to forget. My sense is we don't forget because we're constantly in a mild viral state of depression or anxiety or stress or feeling on guard and all that kind of stuff. The awareness starts to grow. It's kind of like people in early sobriety. They're generally incredibly relieved to know that they don't have to pick up a drink or a drug. That freedom that they get with realizing they never had any control over it gives them a moment of reprieve, but it starts to also give them a clarity. That's what happened to me in my first 3 or 4 months of actual sobriety. I realized I was insane. I had a real serious mental problem since the time I could think back to being 3 and 4 years old. When anybody told me what to do, I'd do the opposite immediately, thinking that that's what they were telling me to do, because I thought there was some rainbow at the end of that. So if the nature of nature is natural, then certainly thinking it's unnatural for us would be a grandiose idea. The reduction of our capacity is actually grandiose because it's actually trying to claim that we can actually destroy by being insane reality. We only destroy our experience, and even our experience isn't destroyed because it immediately gives us a palpable responsiveness in our body that is telling us something is seriously wrong because we wear that weight in those words. We use those words to define it, and to see them accurately is to start to see that those words are actually defining what we're thinking. Not who we are, not what we are, not our essence at all. And it's just creating an experience that's difficult. So if we're free to think what we want, we're free to feel that we're condemned by what we think. That's how free we are. We're free to think the only thing we can do is kill ourselves to resolve the problem, rather than see that seeing it honestly allows us to immediately see that we don't have to continue. We have no obligation to continue entertaining those thoughts, ever. We never have it. We've never been obligated. We've only lived within the induced insanity of making believe that all that was happening was what we thought was happening, meaning that nothing else was happening. So reality wasn't happening. That you can't get more traumatic than that. I was stabbed by one guy at one time. The idea that we're not in reality is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week sense of isolation, being buried alive, being separate from, being of no value, being of no use. It's caustic. And if it's been going on historically, we've baked it into our DNA to a degree to have our bodies incapable of dealing with things they used to easily adapt to, because the environment we've created has been insane, and a sane body doesn't know what to do with insanity, so it comes up with all kinds of solutions. And we're asking our body, this isn't happening because thinking happens on its own. We're asking our thinking to do what it is that causes the somatic responses and reactions in our body. We're asking that to happen. We're looking for trouble. We're asking for trouble. We will find it. So I guess where's the joke in it all? And I would say to see that it's nothing more than a thought is kind of funny when we've been making believe it was our life, and it was this really heavy thing that we needed to spend another 20 years unraveling and dealing with. And, the unraveling, Jana mentioned the word earlier, and it's a very good one, because it's kind of like if you've twisted a rope and twisted and twisted and twisted until you can twist no more, and it's all in a gnarled bundle of twists, and you let it go, it just naturally unravels. So there's no effort in the letting go, because it's really beginning to see we haven't been hanging on to anything but a thought we were hanging on to something. And the more committed I am to that thought, the more I think I need to do to feel better than it and try to get over it, rather than see that there's absolutely nothing to feel better than, and there's nothing to get over, and boom, Jana used the word earlier, disillusion, it dissolves. Why does it dissolve? Because we took fog for a bank, a mountain. We thought it was a mountain. It was a foggy notion. See-through, permeable, transparent.
But it's like being granted grace. The feeling is like grace.
Yeah. Well, and grace is smooth and elegant and beautiful and loving and caring and fluid and flexible and all those things in our human experience.
And that's what
and
happens.
if that's our nature, and we believe it is in our nature, think how committed we have been to an unnatural experience, an unhealthy, illogical, unreasonable, irrational, insane experience, to consider that that's our nature, the insane experience. And consider that it takes no more than an absolute thought right now, an awareness to say, I know better than that. I have no obligation. Neutrality in choice and in sobriety is beginning to see that choice is an option always. We can choose anything that we can choose, and we can also choose not to choose. They're all part of the potential of a choice. And when we say things like, I have no other choice, why would we use the word choice? If we had no other choice, we wouldn't be talking about it. We would be doing the thing we claim not to have any choice to do. We wouldn't be arguing over it. So back to the story, Mark. Those storytelling, that immorality of the story trying to make a point it can't make, is really trying to make the point the person telling the story is trying to claim irresponsibility as their nature. When if there is a responsible, knowing nature that is the subatomic structure, and even more sub than that, to all of reality and essence, the essence of life, existence. Who knows where it ends? We don't even know the size of the universe. We have some ideas, but we really don't know our own universe. And yet it seems there's other universes. The fact that we can't comprehend it doesn't mean that we don't know that whatever they are, however they are, wherever they are, whenever they are, now. We can know all that. We can base our thinking on something absolute and knowing. I was heading toward another point. That I may find in a minute. Anyway, it's a joke. It is a cosmic joke to make believe that we're the creators of reality, when in fact we're byproducts If we're the creators of reality, that means there was no history before humans existed. I don't even know how long that is, but it's a pretty short period of time compared to the recognized length of the universe. Challenges, contradictions, thoughts, fights, rubs, anything?
Well, I do think that part of the problem of why it's so hard for us to get to the point of dissolution before we start defending is because people like, well, familiarity, of course, but also I think that people relate to each other in a negative fashion. Like if you're at I don't want to say a cocktail party, that would be inappropriate for our forum, but you're at a social event and two gals start talking, it's often in some kind of negative way to connect. I mean, that's the human way.
Well, think of that right there, Jenna, and ask yourself, is it possible that may not be true?
Sure.
Yeah.
But in my experience,
if we've developed it to have abnormality become normal, that still doesn't make it normal. It makes abnormality. You can see the conflict. When abnormal becomes normal, there's a conflict.
Okay, I would say the commonality of it, that it happened.
Well, it certainly is obvious that there's a lot of reactivity.
Correct.
So in our discussion, if we can look at that, which is a very good observation, because it's obvious that walking out in the, if I sit and meditate for an hour and I'm quiet and then walk into the world, I tend to find, my best upset is driving. I can't believe people even have licenses, much less cars and insurance, given the way that the lack of regard and the lack of awareness that seems to be expressed. It's a great metaphor for how we tend to operate. The point that we can make here is to see that those same people doing those same things are doing the same sick things that any of us did before we had any awareness that we were doing those sick things, and can just as easily vanish and discredit and disintegrate those things by simply allowing them to be something they're doing rather than something they shouldn't be doing, or something they need to get over, or something they need to stop, or something they need to feel better about. And that was part of my contest with Santiago, is that a lot of what we've learned to do historically is to feel better about what's wrong. So we've actually gotten better as a consequence at maintaining the wrong thinking. In the name of thinking, the only right thing to do is feel better about it. So I run 20 miles a day and I do this, that, and the other thing to feel better, including all the compulsive things. I don't know anybody who gave up alcohol and drugs that doesn't have other compulsions. Largely, food is one of them. Gambling can be one of them. Sex can be one of them. There's all kinds of things that we can attach to. Relationships, finding the exact wrong person to connect with, and not notice that we're really asking them for perspective on our own wrong, rather than ending up thinking that it's them that's so wrong and they're toxic and they're sick and they're narcissists. We need to get away from them, when we're running away with the thing we claim to be running from in terms of the relationship. Doesn't mean we're condemned to hang with people. We have absolute freedom to decide we're not interested in doing something anymore, for whatever the reason. Doesn't matter. We don't have to excuse what we do because we're free to do what we want. So when rationalization and justification step in, we're doing our best to excuse ourselves for something we must not either want to do or think we should be doing. And certainly that would mean it's not the only thing we can be doing. So in your view, Jana, noticing that everybody is also in our conversation, if we can consider that everybody has a basis that's intact, an essence. It doesn't have to be a thinking essence. It doesn't have to be a circumstantial evidence. or essence. It doesn't have to operate in a visible form for it to be and exist, because it seems like the universe is filled with invisibility that seems to be the substructure of everything that matters in the universe, everything that's occurring. And having it invisible doesn't mean we can't see it through understanding by beginning to realize there's a lot going on we don't see. It doesn't mean it's not happening any more than people who used to think the horizon was the end of the world. Everybody beyond that horizon was still doing what they were doing, wherever they were doing what they were doing, and all the countries that existed were there, or all the land, the continents were there. They weren't countries at that point, I imagine. Maybe at some point. There were differing views on when that even occurred to humans. There were different segments of human populations that continued to believe the horizon was doomed thousands of years after other people had sailed the world freely. But again, it's the idea we struggle with. It's not reality that we struggle with. And if that's the case, it's the same for everyone else. And so to see the reactiveness and the defensiveness and start to know that those people also know, if there's any essence, it's essential and it's not negotiable, it's not optional. It's something we all have together simultaneously, which is the point of this conversation, is to start to operate on the basis of what we all have consistently, seamlessly, knowingly, and begin to dispel the rumors of the conversation and the words we use to continue to perpetuate this other thing that we think is real and hard to resolve, when in fact it is no more than we make of it right now and continue to make believe it is, that it isn't. That's the joke in it all.
I don't know that we really believe it's real. I think that there's the familiarity of the angst and the anxiety. So we create it knowing, because we have that underlying knowing that, of course, it's not real, but we don't know how to soothe it.
But why would it be that we would know how to create it and not soothe it? Why would it not be soothing if we were creating it based on that knowing nature? If we weren't thinking, how could it not be soothing if we were manifesting an opinion about it?
Because it's familiar. It manifests chaos because it's all we've ever known. When you've been raised by wolves in Venice, I mean, there's a lack of awareness that has to be cultivated.
Okay, so I'm going to dig in with you a little bit here, okay?
Do it. Let's go, baby.
I'm gonna cut some. I'm gonna cut some wheat. If we know it, is it possible we can't know it?
No, but it's possible that our angst and anxiety could be like static in between us and our underlying knowing, and
so it has.
We're drawn towards that chaos, because even though, like, in my gut feeling, I know everything's okay and everything is as it should be, and that yes, in fact, there is the absolute, but nonetheless, if I haven't had an anxious, chaotic time in a while, I'll create one.
No doubt.
It's familiar, but it's they're few and far between now. And I'm aware of what I'm doing, and I'll do it anyway because I'm an addict.
Well, if the mental problem is the source of addiction, consider maybe, possibly, it's the thinking you're doing that isn't correct that's causing that lack of soothingness and that impulse to constantly repeat it, thinking somehow you'll get better redoing it.
Well, I miss the chaos. I'm probably bipolar, and there's no highs and lows in my neutrality, which is a beautiful thing, which is a state of grace for sure. But sometimes that gets boring.
Here's the difference. One of them you don't think you're doing, the other one you can do consciously and absolutely experience the exhilaration in a way that you probably never felt. And also notice how far down you can go freely, not condemned, not as a byproduct of something happening to you, but you can choose and see that there's nothing lacking in it at all, except right now the opinion that that's not where you want to go because you're having so much fun being insane.
Yeah, exactly. And then I have to call someone and make them my co-conspirator in my insanity and have them soothe me.
So you see, The whole thing feeds on this sort of social complex that we've developed.
Do you think people expect me to call and, I mean, do you think they find it an exciting conversation when I call and I go, yeah, it's all good. I'm totally chill. So how are you? No, they want to hear my chaos. I've been very entertaining for decades.
I'm not suggesting you can't share it. I'm suggesting when you think it's happening in some void between you and reality, like it's happening as though it's happening on its own by itself, as though it's happening to you, you think it has reality for that to be happening.
Yeah.
You think it's something other than your cause and your actual creation. And listen, it's evidence of our creativity that we can imagine that there's this nether zone between us and reality that exists by itself, and not even notice that we think it's real. And it's between reality. How would it be real and between reality and ourself if there wasn't something imaginative about it that was somewhat in conflict with the whole? So this isn't about not telling stories. It's about beginning to develop a narrative that when you tell the story, that person listening will have a benefit because they'll hear the principal point of that story. And you'll be carrying a message that actually isn't carrying a disease, but it's carrying a message of love and the capacity we have to imagine. Think of all the movies we've ever gone to and the extraordinary experiences that they provide when they're literally images on screen to elicit an opportunity to share an experience that we would otherwise never have in that same way. And they're all just projections. And some of them are depressing, some of them are horrifying, but they're talking about something. They're having us look at our own experience in a way that is palpable. That same imagery is what we're doing in our own thinking. We're creating movies, we're creating narratives, we're creating stories. There's nothing wrong with those stories.
Okay, so creating and sharing the healthy story. I'll give you a small little story. I have a girlfriend that is dealing with an aged mother. I think she's like 98 or 99 now, and her brother's in charge of that, and they're estranged. And so her choice, how she's chosen to deal with this is that she doesn't know the backstory, but her mom got downsized from a 3-bedroom thing in this care facility. They're very, very wealthy, and to like a studio. And from the minute she wakes up in the morning till the time she goes to bed at night, she's just anxiety ridden and she doesn't know what to do. And then I said, well, let's turn this around. Let's pray together for Barry, or meditate together for Barry, the brother, every single day, and be grateful for his efforts and know that she's not in danger and she's still well cared for. And maybe she doesn't have the facility that she had previously, but, and she cut me off, and she said that, I'm entitled to my opinion, but that I didn't understand. And I said, no, I do understand, but I just know that in my experience that just being anxiety ridden and without even the facts, the truth of the facts, like the story that she's creating behind her anxiety may bear no facts at all. So let's look at the things that we do know, that mommy's still, physically okay, that she's in a safe position. Maybe it's not as opulent as it was before. And I just know that for myself, with my resentments towards other people, if I do the old pray for them every day for 90 days, it literally does dissolve. And that anxiety towards that human for me goes away. And I have an appreciation for my brother or sister or whoever it is. Well, someone that's like on ground zero and hasn't done any of the dialogue that we've done to unwind that, it pisses them off.
Well, if this is a moral story, what's the moral? What's the principle?
The principle, I'm not exactly, well, it would be, I don't know. I just know the steps that I take to do it is, instead of engaging in dissension, or instead of defending, or instead of attacking, I literally just pray for abundance and for the next right thing and for that person, and somehow things change. They just get better for me. I get that state of grace in every opportunity, but that's where I go back to, for me, having studied the Course in Miracles for so long, I used to always say there's only two realities, love and fear. And when anybody acts out, it's only because they're in fear. But for me, I believe that only love is real. And I just go back to that and go back to that and go back to that. And I'm most days in a state of grace.
Well, so let's look at the principle.
Okay.
If there is a state of grace, it would not be something that would be optional if it's a principle. It would be a
Right.
natural state, regardless of what we think.
Right.
So the divergent thinking is what gives us the impression that we're not in a state of grace. It isn't reality giving us that impression. It's what we're thinking about reality.
Correct.
And if that grace exists, I don't need to pray for it because I've already been given. If I'm praying for it as though I don't have it, that would suggest that that infinite source is keeping something to itself.
That's just a self-soothing tool that I use to calm my self-imposed and self-created angst and anxiety. It's how I unwind. So
Yep.
I know, like we've talked about meditation before, and you're like, hey, your whole life's of meditation. And that gave me the freedom to not sit there and be anxious about my thoughts, just to go back to the next right thing all day, every day.
So this is a meditation right now.
Okay.
Okay. And if the absolute nature of the absolute nature is natural and absolute,
Mm-hmm.
what would there be to unwind in that has anything to do with anything other than what we think of that?
The static is our thoughts, and
Yeah.
the static needs to be the cobwebs that are keeping us from our awareness of.
So think of that now. You've created an image of cobwebs obstructing. This is an image you're creating with the story you're telling to suggest that reality now, that cobwebs are more powerful than reality because they can obstruct it.
Not completely obstructed, because I still have my underlying knowing.
Okay, let's talk to the degree that they're obstructing it. That they can a little bit, that something infinite can be a little bit obstructed. Think of that.
Well, you mean the absolute is infinite, not the cobwebs?
Yes, you're using an example of something that you're creating. You're creating an image to make believe that it can obstruct reality.
Well, it's not reality, but when it's created and I'm experiencing the angst and the anxiety that I created 100%, that it's not real, nonetheless, the only way for me to unwind it is to do something, I guess, as false as it is, because I just know that to separate my brain from the incorruptible innocence of the essence of who I am, I have to do some steps. And the steps for me are to think about it, become aware of my underlying knowing, to bring that forward.
Okay, so think about that. Think about your words. You think it's backward if you're moving it forward. You think it's somewhere else other than where you are. So
True.
Part of this premise is starting to see, when Mark heard absolute, he looked the word up and started to define it. You may want to play with that, because if something's absolute, infinite, unlimited, omnipotent, omniscient, any of those things, they are not optional in any respect. And the rub is thinking they're optional. Thinking that our thinking about them causes them to dissipate, rather than we're diminishing our thinking by thinking about them in diminished ways. It's our own experience of what we're thinking that's giving us that impression, not reality and truth, what we're thinking of it. Now, we've talked about this. What's that?
Correct, exactly. That's what what I'm thinking of it. And
the other thing in the Course in Miracles it talks about love and fear up until the point it begins to point out the fact that the fear is being caused by insanity and it doesn't really exist.
Correct.
Okay. So if we're thinking of love and fear as being the only two things, it doesn't mean that our bodies don't have the capacity to deal with issues that are happening in the present moment that are threatening. But when we are the greatest threat in the thinking we're doing and causing the impression that our bodies are now at war with the thinking we're doing, we are actually the threat. We are choosing to be the threat we're claiming to exist. And that self-induced fear is the same thing as the induction and or inducement of the idea that who I am is what I think, rather than starting to see that thinking is a byproduct of my existence and being is the essence of existence. A nature that isn't convertible, isn't transitional, isn't coming and going, isn't up or down or more or less. It's just an absolute state of being that, by the way, would be wherever we are now, always present in the immediacy of the simultaneous nature of our absolute seamless experience. Doesn't mean we don't have thoughts to the contrary, but if there's anything contrary to what we're thinking, not reality, but we're thinking about reality and each other that we're struggling with. So when you're talking about unraveling and you're unraveling all the years of ideas you've developed around that, what you need to do to feel better about it, you're actually insisting on maintaining that basic idea that reality isn't reality, it's what you've made of it that's real, and that what you need to do is keep fixing the thing you made of it rather than realize it's delusional to imagine you can have any effect on it.
Hey, Jack.
The effects you're creating is in your own body, your own thinking, and yet we're all doing that to whatever degree we're nursing ideas that aren't true as true or are true as untrue. JP.
I think you're missing something here. I think you're missing something here.
You're probably right.
You know, she uses the word. She was used that word should a whole bunch, and all shoulds are belief. And she has a permission-giving device that she takes this 90-day prayer vigilant stance, and everything feels better. She believes that because it's a permission-giving device. She cites it so specifically in that she talks about, the girlfriend talking to her, and the girlfriend shares negativity, and the negativity is the thing that they share, and then they get together in that conversation. She was really eloquent about that. But
so what do you see?
Well, what I see is that you guys you skip over this thing and you call it thinking, but it's not thinking. It's how thinking changes into a belief that becomes a permission-giving device so that she can feel better.
Okay. So if we're feeling better about what's worse, what is it you think that might prevent us from not feeling worse and not having to constantly create all these parades to feel better? What would we be doing with our day if we weren't constantly trying to feel better, if we didn't do what was constantly worse? What if we just noticed what's worse and began operating on an intuitive basis of expressing reality rather than constantly thinking we have to manage reality?
What's your question?
What would we be doing?
That's where it gets to, Jack, though. That's the disillusion part, that when I feel like I feel the urge to defend in any way, shape, or form, it dissolves now, and that's the grace. But that's how it became that my awareness that my thoughts are not real. That's how it manifests for me.
But it sounds like JP's observing you doing some of that same thing. Is that right?
No, but I'm trying to just clear something up. Whatever you want to call it, it is a permission-giving device. It gives you power, but it's not real. It's a belief structure.
Yes.
Right. So when you search for whatever your question was,
what's it based in? What's it based in? What are beliefs based in?
It's all beliefs are the idea that you have to do something to become happy. But the point is that the unhappiness is the creation of a belief, not the
Yeah.
happiness.
Yeah, yeah.
Happiness.
The point is, let's go back. Let's go back.
Happiness means.
What's the root of
Hang
a
on a
belief?
second. Whoa. So the thing that you have to understand is that happiness is to be. You have to
Or just
create something to
neutrality.
become.
Or just neutrality, not necessarily happiness, just neutrality.
So let's look again at the basis of a belief. What's it made up of?
Thoughts.
Thought.
Yeah.
Me and Anthony.
And guess what the conflict is when we make up thoughts that we believe. Let me assure you, this was the issue I had with Santiago last week.
You just said it, Jack. You just said make up thoughts with a belief. So you're
Yes.
changing thought into a belief.
No. Thoughts are primary to belief because we have no obligation to believe in anything. We develop beliefs based on what we think. When we think our
That's what I'm
thinking is
talking about.
reality, what's that?
That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that your thinking is meaningless until it creates a belief. When it creates a belief is when it gets the injection in it, and then all of a sudden you want to fight a war about it. And that's what
Okay.
she's talking about.
But that's addiction in my
No,
definition.
it's not. It's belief.
Okay.
It has
So
nothing to do with addiction.
Belief in something that is false, nothing that's real needs belief. Reality doesn't need belief because it's real. Truth
You don't
doesn't need
need to
belief.
believe it to have it happen.
Really?
We're talking about the belief.
Did you
right?
believe in
when
it
you
when you were
change that
born?
thought,
Did you believe
when
in
you
it when you were
change that
born?
thought, you're just going to step on me, right?
Well, I'm going to confront you, yes.
Well, you're not confronting me, you're stepping on my vocals. So if you understand that the thought, your thinking, all this stuff that you talk about endlessly, thinking, right, is meaningless until you attribute a belief to it. When you attribute a belief to it, it gets that fucking adrenal shot, and then we're willing to go to war.
Yeah, exactly. So that's insanity.
It's religion.
It's insanity.
It's the same thing.
Okay. So the basic definition of belief, according to my dictionary, says something believed, no shit. But it says an opinion or conviction.
That's really interesting that your dictionary, this is a joke, that your dictionary defines things with the same word.
I find it a lot in dictionaries. Look up the word action. Action has the same thing. It repeats acting 16 times. But
all I was doing was just trying to help that conversation along back there.
Keep in mind, if an absolute reality is real and it's absolute knowing, if it's absolute knowing, omniscience, we don't have to have belief in it for it to be absolute knowing. We don't have to have belief in it to know. And intuition, by definition, is knowledge beyond reason, meaning there's no understanding in it, there's no thinking in it. We're talking about beginning to recognize that we have a natural basis, a primary essential basis to our existence that is not in thought and does not need belief, faith, trust, or any of that to exist. It simply is as it is, regardless of what we think of it, regardless of what we believe in or don't believe in. And all of what you're describing, JP, are commitments we have to thinking the thoughts we have are true and real, which are we wouldn't be believing in them if they were true or real. We would be acting on them intuitively. There wouldn't be a substructure of rationalization and justification to come to a conclusion that we need to fight and kill other people over.
Sure there is. Sure there is. It's the precursor. There is, you can't define this true and real as true and real, and then everybody steps off the planet. It doesn't work like that. The true and real is a belief.
I see.
In
an absolute
the only reason
sense,
I interjected in it.
So before humans believed in truth and reality, there was no truth or reality in the universe. It had no substructure whatsoever. It had no existence or essence.
Please.
That's what you're saying.
No, I'm not. please, what we really, I used to call that a 3 beer conversation, because you're talking about you're talking about a situation that requires that we review how we got here. So all I was trying to do by interjecting, and I almost regret it at this point, is to say that we create a permission giving device so that we can feel better about something. And she was very poignant about that.
Yeah, we're feeling better about what's wrong. It's exactly
But
what addiction is.
It's
I want to
fake.
drink while it's killing me. I want a drug while it's killing me. I think I'm better because I'm feeling better, but I'm treating the effect rather than noticing the cause. The cause is in the thought that the thought can be real and true, rather than simply a decision I make about reality and truth. So here's the definition of truth, according to my dictionary: the actual state of a matter or matter, conformity with fact or reality. Conformity with fact. It's not made up sort of because I make the decision and it's not conforming with reality and all of a sudden it becomes truth. That isn't truth. That's a belief based on a lie, based on an idea that absolutely will put me at odds with everything and everyone else, because the nature of my nature becomes defensive and reactive, exactly as Jana was describing.
I think it just, the process that I use expands my awareness and does in fact give me permission to surrender to the reality that my thoughts are bullshit. So just let them go. But I can't always just instantly get into that state of grace, even though it's there and it's absolute. And I have an underlying knowing as a flawed human being with a brain that overthinks. Sometimes I have to go through a little process to get that awareness.
And that's a belief. That's a belief.
That's the truth.
Yeah, see what you're going to, Jana.
I know.
That's the truth.
Yeah.
No, that's the truth. And you're thinking that is the truth. You're committed to that as truth rather than the absolute freedom of truth that doesn't include any thinking at all. That is just a knowing sense that allows thinking to be chosen from inspiration rather than desperation.
Would I be afraid if I just laid around and drooled all the time and didn't go through all this brain damage?
Isn't it interesting, though, that you would use that as the only other option than an inspiration? I'm going to suggest to you all, which I have many times, and you may not hear this or believe it, but there is no surrender involved whatsoever in reality, because it doesn't change. There is no surrender. The surrender is in the opinion that we're fighting something and that there is any fight that can ever have any impact on reality. It never does. It simply impacts our experience. To create those feelings you have that you think you need to feel better about, it's all stemming from the idea that an absolute state is a negotiable, optional state of being that we choose in thinking, and without thinking about it, it doesn't exist. That is not true, because truth and reality seem to be fairly pervasive in the universe before we existed. As a race, before anyone thought about their thinking amongst the human race, there seemed to be a universe here. Maybe there wasn't. Maybe that's just all another story. But there seemed to be a universe here billions of years before we arrived in terms of what we're doing. Now, perhaps that was concocted in some way that just gave us the appearance of that time and space. That's really nothing more than another projection and another thought and another conscious motivation. But it seems pretty thick that a infinite source would create a dilemma for us that was impossible for any good reason, for any loving, infinite reason. That would seem to be exactly what we're doing in the name of reality, and blaming on that power, blaming on that ultimate source. So one of the things JP, you came in a little bit late today. One of the things that I want to do.
I'm sorry, I missed the change in the time. I apologize.
No, that wasn't it so much as that one of the things we all decided to do, because there's a lot of opinions, there's a lot of potential for reactivity, there's a lot of potential for debate, there's a lot of potential for kind of going back and forth over some of this stuff. What I would like to do is see if we can't come to an agreement that we're here to look at principles, and we're here to look at morals, and we're here to look at the best we can do rather than the potential we have to argue or contest and fight, and find out what is it that we have that we absolutely can talk about simultaneously as something that we all share, rather than the division of thoughts we have and maintain that create this idea that somehow or another everybody else needs to understand us before everybody else can straighten out, rather than see that we have a knowing nature, we have a principled nature in our existence. And part of that today was coming up with the couple of the thoughts that came up was the idea that if we just consider that maybe things might possibly not be true, and that it doesn't mean we can't think those things, it means we're perfectly free to think those things. But if we're thinking those things and they're not true, they're going to cause a reactive, defensive awareness in our body language that can make clear, I don't defend anything that's right because there's nothing I can defend. There's absolutely nothing I can defend about rightness and reality and truth. Rightness would be the actual terms of life rather than the terms I think life has. So when people decided to fly, they adjusted their formulas to the potential for aerodynamics that existed. It wasn't, they didn't create aerodynamics, they created aerodynamic potential with forms that they reshaped. The aerodynamics of space was already in perfect order, was already part of the natural order. There were birds flying, there were dinosaurs flying, whatever they were doing, there was already flight. It was already known to exist. It wasn't something we created. We simply learned to adapt to align with existing reality, how it is. That doesn't mean we made reality. It means we actually agreed with, aligned with, began to express reality. And in this conversation, if we talk from the point of view that we may have something common between us, something incontrovertible, indiscriminate, inequitable, or equitable, indiscriminate, indistinguishable, something that can't be divided, some absolute source that isn't bound by these relative terms that we think are so common as to think it's all that exists, is to start having a conversation that may allow us some intuitive insight, which I would say is what thinking's actually designed to express, which has wisdom attached to it, because the benefits would be benefits for not those of us that are just here because we come to some temporary conclusion or temporary negotiated settlement between what we think and either misunderstand or understand, but because we actually start speaking about things that everybody shares, everybody everywhere and everything everywhere share in the most fundamental basis. And I would say, to your point, Jana, that's grace. Grace is fluid, elegant, beautiful, uninterruptible. It's not a state we achieve. It's simply something we begin to recognize when we're not preoccupied with thinking about things that are conflicted and thinking about things that we think someday will turn into truth. The longer we fight for them, the longer we defend them, the longer we make believe that they can be or will be someday true. Any of that isn't true to begin with. So it doesn't matter how long we spend.
Well, the progress is to be able to like rest in neutrality rather than always seeking a parade. Because
so you're always there. If
Yep.
it's there, you must always be there thinking you're not. So let's start there for next week. Consider that during the week. We're at the end of our 2 hours, and I want to respect the time frame. Consider that you're there. You can't be anywhere else. It can't be somewhere else if it's infinite.
See,
And
if this was 2 years ago, I would have resented that you totally cut me off.
Thank you.
What a fucking dickweed, Jack, really?
But
I'm cool because I'm resting in neutrality because that's the only thing that's real.
Well, don't mistake the fact that we can create and manifest effects. That's what thoughts do. They manifest effects.
I mean, that would never even have happened last week with what's his fuck if you had just cut him off.
What's that?
I said that whole skirmish with what's his name from last week would never have happened with Santiago. That wouldn't have happened if you had used your boundary and said, this is time, because I missed it because you said goodbye And then you guys kept talking. So I signed off, and apparently you went on and on and on beyond the 2 hours with Santiago, and it turned into a shit show.
Yeah. Well, it was the standard conflict that occurs, and I do my best to maintain the ground of stating that reality is reality and truth is true, and they aren't discussable or optional. And to think that they are would be to promote ideas that continue to infect the whole and carry a disease that's a contagion. And
But
we've
don't
been
you think
suffering.
do you think your awareness of those things is in fact optional? Just your awareness of it.
No, not in the ultimate sense of awareness, but in my thinking's awareness, I make believe things are true that aren't true.
Ah,
Yes,
there you
but that's
go.
but John, that's coming out of a thought that I imagine can be reality simply because I conclude it. We talked about this earlier today. People stood on the earth, looked at the stars,
Very,
and presumed they were at the center of the universe. That's the same
I
as this
understand.
thinking we do.
Your dogma of truth and reality that dictates throughout this whole thing that you do is debatable.
Oof.
Okay, I know. So is insanity. As a matter
No,
of
that's
fact, insanity
that's
is debatable.
definable.
No,
I'm not
the insane
that
person thinks
if-
they're sane. That's why they're insane.
11:15, guys. I
suggesting-
love you guys. I'm taking off. Bye-bye.
Mark, I'll
Bye,
see you.
Louie.
I'm not suggesting that Bill Wilson didn't have spirituality until he took LSD. What I'm suggesting is that he found spirituality because he took LSD.
His awareness became expanded, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you, JP.
No,
Like,
it's correct. You're absolutely right.
So then human thinking is responsible for reality. They're just words. Reality and truth are words for nonsense.
I get something.
No,
right
no,
now.
no, no,
Word.
no. They're not words.
They are just words.
Jack.
They
They're
are
dogmas
words.
that you continually profess.
Okay.
They're not words because we can't debate them because you won't allow us to debate them.
Well, that's part of what we talked about. Listen, humanity's been debating them through the entirety of human history, justifying killing other people because we don't think alike. If there's anything
We are bred to
absolute,
kill other people.
if there's anything absolute and infinite, it isn't debatable, yet we can debate it. It doesn't have any impact on it if it exists. Those are words. They're just words as references to something. But if it exists as it is. It doesn't think of itself as infinite because it doesn't think of itself. It's absolute knowing. It's omniscience.
Yeah,
Maybe it doesn't exist, John. Maybe it doesn't exist. Maybe it does
It's 3
not
beers,
exist.
No,
I don't need to be in a
Anyway,
state of need to be in a state of intoxication to concede that if it exists, it exists. And to consider it and
That's a
start
thought.
to live with that for a second. Yeah, it's a thought. If I consider that maybe possibly the conflict I've been having is in my thinking about it and not it, I begin to notice that I've never had anything to surrender to except the thinking I'm doing. And then I begin to realize it's delusional. And if it's delusional and I'm continuing to maintain it, I have induced a state of insanity that I think is all that there is in terms of sanity. Why wouldn't I go kill other people and think that that's the best and only thing I can do?
Okay, so is there a
Because you were
difference
bred to.
is there a difference between a thought versus a word? And is there a difference between your intuition versus
Thinking?
well, not thinking so much, your subconscious.
Intuition is
thinking.
knowing.
Okay, and your subconscious is thinking.
Well-
JP, this is Gabe. JP,
Hi, Gabe.
were you trying to say that every thought is a belief?
No, I'm saying that the thought gets converted into belief.
Yeah.
And again,
that's
it's
when it-
rooted in making
and that's
belief
when
not
we
be
get-
real.
Hey, Jack, let him talk.
that when it gets hello, 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 hello. It's like shoulds. All shoulds are beliefs. Every time that she says, should, like four sentences in a row when she's talking about her girlfriend and her, those are all beliefs. And when you start to put beliefs, that's when you create things like unhappiness. You create that by believing that you should be away that you're not supposed to be. It's like, my wife doesn't like me to be a way that she doesn't want me to be. Am I being clear, Gabe?
Oh, yeah.
I'm married too, so I get it.
No, but think
Jack,
about what I'm saying, Gabe. She wants me to be a way that she wants me to be. And if I'm not being that way, right, then she is unhappy with me. So she creates that belief, right? And then she fuels it. See, that's not thinking. See, that's when thinking becomes something other. And that's why I keep trying to pull these reins back just a little bit to see what we're talking about. It's the same thing as saying that truth is truth and we can't debate that. Where do you go with that? And now I appreciate, that this is my buddy's show and I respect that.
Well, but this isn't a show to show something. If reality is reality and there's nowhere to go with it, wouldn't it suggest it's where we are now on the basis of maybe thinking better about what we're doing? Maybe there's nowhere to go, and that's actually an accurate assessment of that essence. Maybe, I don't know. But I want to point out, while we're in that little tidbit of, back and forth, it is always the case that the positions taken that are defensive are always taken seriously enough to continue to defend and defend and defend. That's the reactiveness of the ideas that we have. You're talking about your wife, but you're actually talking really about your beliefs about your wife. You're not talking about her. You're talking about what you think about her.
Negative. I'm trying to answer Gabe's question with an analogy.
You have perfect clarity in her,
Gabe,
yet your clarity can't be questioned.
Gabe, did I answer your question?
I think you answered it about the beliefs, but then I think you answered it about the beliefs. They can be, that thoughts can become, or some thoughts can become beliefs, but
they certainly can.
Not all thoughts turn into beliefs.
Correct.
That's correct. And when they are thought, right? Yeah. They have an innocence. They have a, what was that word you used before? They have a
incorruptible
grace.
Oh no, a grace. That was just a great word, right? So they have a grace because they're thinking. But Gabe, when that thinking turns into a belief, and then we get into all this kind of animosity and and Columbusian ideas, that's when things go different.
It's only when those beliefs are wrong that we feel that difference is polluted.
You see? He's back to truth and untruth and wrong and right. And that's not where we're going here.
John,
what I'm trying to say is that I'm not
the definition of belief is confidence in the truth or existence of something not immediately susceptible to rigorous proof.
That's fine. But belief is what is
it's a decision.
Belief is what is beloved of you. You choose your beliefs.
Yes, like we choose our thoughts.
I thought we were striving for neutrality, and there is no right and wrong. No?
There is no right and wrong in an absolute state of being, but the difference between right and wrong in the human experience is that one works productively because it's based on principles of life, and the other one creates controversy and subjects us to constant debate and bickering, as we have done through human history, that leads to the idea that the best thing we can do is war against other people because they don't think like us.
That's not why we do this, but guys, I love you, Jack. It's great listening to you. Sorry I interjected, but but
You were called
I have
in, by the way, JP. You didn't interject. He called you in.
I have to go. And thank you
We're
so
gonna miss
much.
you.
Well,
Okay.
So,
pick it
Take
up,
JP,
pick
care.
it up next week.
Bye,
consider for
guys.
the week, JP. Consider for the week. All right,
He
he's
gone.
gone.
I think that's a
So-
good place to pick up next week, Jack, is thoughts and belief systems and truth and reality. And I think these are things to contemplate for the week.
Yeah, well, so if you're going to contemplate, consider that if truth has any basis at all, it would certainly have a basis in what it is rather than what it's not. And to think of truth as something that's optional is to think that not truth is truth. And that would mean there is no truth and there is no reality, none whatsoever. Now, within the context of insanity, that's actually correct. There is no truth or reality in insanity at all. And the idea that we can come to conclusions and make believe they're true is to make believe fantasy is reality. That's another non existent, insane idea. We're welcome to nurse that. But I guarantee if you witness people's experience, they're in very reactive experiences maintaining those kinds of thoughts. They're all going to be fostered off of one basic idea that it is possible that truth can't be true and reality can't be real. Look up the words. Look up what absolute means. Look up what omniscient means. Look these things up. They aren't talked about. Infinite isn't talked about because we're not aware of it. It's talked about because it identifies the finite nature of our existence as being part of an infinite absolute source. We don't think of those things. We haven't made God up because there's no potential for God. It's an awareness we seem to understand, and yet we assign our thinking to being able to block it and obstruct it when that would be impossible if it is in fact infinite. We can think it's possible. We can think it's limited. We can think we're disconnected. We can think all those things, but that's all based on thinking that is untrue, believed in. We're believing in that for it to be continued to be maintained. We're believing it'll be true. There is no need for belief or faith. This was the point I got stuck with Santiago last week. If something is as it is and it's incontrovertible, it can't be undone. It can't be more or less. It can't be or not be. If it is as it is, any debate we have is certainly welcome. We're all welcome. We've been debating it through human history. It's obvious that we're free to do that. I'm not suggesting it's indebatable. I'm suggesting the debate has absolutely no impact whatsoever on it. None at all. There's the grace. There's the healing. There's the forgiveness. Beginning to notice it is as it is, regardless of what we think. And it brings thinking down to a very little thing that seems to be chosen to entertain us rather than something to think is so serious that we can actually obstruct and put any kind of veil over reality and truth. We can think we're doing that, but those aren't sane thoughts to think those things. Any more to consider for the week? Because I think that's something we haven't been talking about, and I think it's really worthy of doing.
No, Jack, the only thing I would say is having done this 2 weeks in a row at the end, there's something we're not explaining correctly. There's something.
No, Gabe, my
I
sense is this is when you ask someone to look at something clearly that they've been maintaining as their truth, it creates more reactivity rather than less.
Okay.
You know what I did with the insane guy when I took care of him and did all those things? I gave him the impression he was better. I gave him the impression when he was better, when he was thinking to himself, I got this guy. Now he's telling me I'm right. Now I'm telling him, I'm helping him be more insane by giving him the impression that being nicer and kinder while he went through that phase where he was helpful and responded to me was actually helping him get better. It actually isn't. People will live with the experience they create. Nothing is going to convince them greater than their own, than that personal thing they're dealing with 24 hours a day. And
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting there isn't another way we can do that here, because my suggestion is that we tear down and focus on the principles so that people can contemplate the principles. We're already all in enough bickering and reactiveness with each other in some way during the week. I don't think we need proof of that. I think we got enough evidence. If we could pare down and look more at the principles and start to see that there's something we share, and start to notice the thoughts we have that seem to compel us to argue over, we'll start noticing that those thoughts wouldn't be arguable to us and defensive in us or reactive if they were true. We'd be sharing it, we'd all know it. They wouldn't be operating that way. Starting to see that starts to dissolve this collective problem. It's easy to talk about this one-on-one. It's a little more difficult when more bodies get involved and more voices get involved. It becomes a little more sensitive, a little more acute. So
Kind of interesting, though.
it is, and it's also a little disheartening to the degree that we can engage in. I mean, people always talk to me. Last week, Santiago was talking about happiness. I'm not happy when I see all this going on in the world. This is the world I'm in. I don't want to be an influence that continues to say it's okay. Let's just keep doing this. This is the best thing we can do. It's the only thing we can do. I don't want to do that. I don't want to live here doing that. I don't think that's my purpose. And I don't think it's our purpose. I think our purpose is to express the abundance, not the scarcity, and the unlimited nature of our existence that's intuitive and wise, rather than think we're going to continue to divide over these little ideas and somehow sort them out. There's no hope in that. It's like dividing one in half. You can go forever. It'll never end up nothing. You'll never have the freedom of just that nothingness, that absolute state of freedom in that neutrality where we can choose from inspiration rather than desperation. So I will continue to plod along. I don't always know the best way to do this, but I know the way it's done is the way it's done, and that's it. There's nothing we can do to change it. It's how it goes as it goes. If we can get better as a group, perhaps we can be a better voice for others in the world dealing with the same issues and start to actually tamp down some of these more principled ideas that gave you the experience you had and Mark the experience he had and others who may be announcing or not announcing, because my sense is we don't always know what happens. We just know something changed dramatically when we begin to consider that the knowing we have has already been almost, we've woken up to it when in fact all we were doing was thinking we were asleep. It's like a bad dream. When you think you're in the dream, it can be a nightmare. To wake up and say it was a dream diminishes all those manifestations and effects that we create. So.
Well, being a witness to Gabe has changed my life, that's for sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, you're the shining star of our whole group. You made us all want to experience what you experienced, and it's been beautiful.
Yeah. Thanks to you guys.
Yeah, amazing.
Okay.
So
Jeff.
we continue to grow, continue to consider, continue to imagine that things we think are absolutely true may not be. And if there's conflict attached to them, it's a pretty good indication that something isn't right.
Yay.
Love you guys.
Love you.
Love you. Bye, Jack. Thank you.
Bye.
You bet. Thanks.
Bye, Gabe.
Bye. Bye, Jen.